Hello. This is a game that was played in the Four Nations Chess League. I played this last weekend. It was my first game for a while in the Four Nations Chess League, and I was quite pleased with it. It was a nice quick win. I was originally planning to play 1e4 in this event, but I saw my opponent was quite young. I thought I would stick to my usual 1d4, which is what I played in this game. So the game followed these lines: d4. So we've got a Pirc Defence. I'm quite happy with these lines. I seem to have quite reasonable positions against them. I tend to play a little sort of horns of the bull type setup with the bishops and the knights, and just come into their natural squares. Bishop g6, knight f3. I think it's all fairly common. Maybe the bishop c4. Sometimes that's not played yet, but I quite like this kind of position. Here I played h3 in order to guard against anything coming in on this square, and it has been played several times. I looked at the game, I looked up this position, and there's quite a few games in this line, so it's been quite reasonable for white. However, it does allow a little tactic which my opponent played, which I hadn't really thought about, to be honest, although I have seen this sort of thing, of course, in other positions. Knight e4. This, of course, is playable. Knight takes e4. It looks like you've lost a knight for a pawn here, but it's playable because, of course, if knight takes knight, then pawn to d5, forking. Forking the bishop and the knight, of course. Oh dear. Right. Yeah, forking the bishop and the knight. So that makes that whole variation playable. So now the question is, in this position, if this happened, what do you do? Well, I examined this before I made one. I thought for a little while on this move actually, and I thought if I'd reached this position, I was probably going to play bishop takes d4, which after queen d4 and then knight dropping back to c3, I thought was probably okay. I've given up the two bishops, but for some reason I just didn't fancy that position. The other alternative, well, if I had really thought about it, the other alternative after taking would have actually, if I'd seen it, if I'd thought about it, I would have played it, which would have been to drop the bishop back here to d3, because then after pawn takes, bishop takes, I haven't given up the bishop pair, which I unfortunately do in the other positions. But there's not a lot in it. All these variations, there's not actually a great deal in it. What I in fact elected to play in the game after knight takes e4, because I've got to get my pawn back somehow, was bishop takes f7 check, getting the pawn back that way. So it's really forced to capture, with the rook. And then knight takes. Knights are in a reasonable position, but I've given up the two bishops, and black has potential threats along the f-file, which could be embarrassing. I have to be careful about that. But I think the position is pretty level. Fritz would agree it's a very level position. The game now continued. Knight c6. Fritz reckons that d5 would be a better move for white. This would I would probably have followed this up with knight to c5, and then I think maybe b6, knight d3. Again, a fairly even position, maybe slightly in white's favour, but not very much. Opponent played knight c6 instead. I played c3 just to play very solidly, to support the centre, to sort of also block anything happening with that bishop down there. Okay. My opponent then played h6, which I think is a very weak move, because it just simply leaves the g6 square undefended and creates lots of weaknesses around black's position. So I thought, well, I've got to try at some point here to target this square here, which has no support. So that's really one of my main thoughts now as the game continues. But I thought, first of all, before I start targeting anything, I need to complete my development. So I did that with bishop e3, which also keeps attacking down toward still facing the king side. After castling, potential pressure down here. So I had to calculate what would happen here with any potential sacrifices of the rook against the knight on this square. I've now played and thought quite a bit about that, and I played queen d2. If knight takes here, rook takes the knight here rather, pawn takes, queen takes, looks a bit dangerous, but knight to g3 covers the rook quite nicely here from the queen's attack, and gives me a chance to maybe exchange off queens, and I think the position is fine, and in fact I would then simply be the exchange up. So I thought, things enter in my head like allow your opponent to make bad moves. I thought that was probably something that he would be planning to play in that position, so that's why I played queen d2, thinking that he might go for that, and actually it wouldn't be as good as he might think it was. But he didn't. He rejected that and played instead probably solid, better move, probably d5. So having calculated knight g3, I played knight g3 here, which seems to keep everything safe, and there's no horrible skewers and pins and forks and things with the queen landing on f3. Now my opponent played what I think was a really bad move. I'm sorry, but this wasn't a good move. The bishop here is now completely blocked in by this pawn on e6. I don't think that's a great move, and it really does not help black's development at all. I think a better move would probably be b6 instead of that, with a view to getting the bishop out somewhere on this side, along here. But that was not played, unfortunately for my opponent. E6 was played, and I think that doesn't help. Along with h6, these two moves really cause him big problems. I now castled queenside, and he really should get on with his development, but he lashed out with a pawn to try and frighten me because my king's moved over there. Didn't frighten me. I now get back to my targeting, so I'm now targeting g6 with a queen. Very dangerous, not much supporting it, so he played rook f6 to protect it. I now hit it again with knight to e5, where it's hit again now twice, of course, and the problem is he can't take it, because in the variation where knight takes e5, pawn takes e5, the rook is hit, which is the defender, so I'm hitting the defender of the pawn on g6. So what's he going to do if he moves back? Then of course queen takes g6, and I've got a very, very nice position with many threats against black's king side. So instead of that, he tried king h7 in order to bring extra support to this pawn. Again, probably not a great move because it's rather pinned. And my next move, knight h5, exposes the pin on there, which means he cannot take this because it's perfectly safe because it's pinned. The pawn on g6 is pinned to the king. So my opponent tried rook f5, which threatens to now to take the knight. But after knight, which I think was quite a good move, this, after knight takes g6, my opponent actually resigned. The moves after that actually weren't played. Okay, so after this move, white resigned. The queen is hit by the knight here, and this rook, if the rook tried to move or something like that, took over here, then of course, then okay. So what chances we got here? So what could he do? Well, the king could take the knight, of course, but that fails to, amongst other things, it fails to g4, because again this horrible pin still on the rook there against the king means that the rook can't move out of the way, of course, and so he loses material there. Other possibility would be to move the queen that's threatened, so the queen moves to f7. That seems reasonable. Then knight g4 comes again. Queen g6, getting some material back, but g takes f5, hits the queen. Really, this is really forced. And then knight takes g7 in order to get out of the way of the threat. Queen takes, and then say rook d g1, and white's exchange up plus a lot of pressure and a big attack, and black is still very much behind in development, and I think there will be a pretty quick win there. But I didn't need to do any of that, because in this position my opponent actually resigned, and so it was quite a nice little win for me. Thanks very much. It's my first attempt at doing one of these videos. I hope it goes okay. And I'll have to talk to you again. Thank you very much. Bye bye.